I've been good. I've been blessed and alive as well. Yep. Going after Ricardo.
Yes, I would agree the same. I'm so glad that we're well into August and seeing all of the weather slowly marching towards winter, because I am telling y'all, I cannot wait until we have cold weather in the south.
Oh my gosh. Everybody's with this cold weather.
I don't know about that. Cold weather in the cold. See, I like the heat. I'm somebody. I love the heat.
Yeah, you like the humid heat though?
No, I hate humid heat.
Yeah, that's.
I like in between of spring and summer. Like it's a nice 60 like to 70. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
But once it starts getting to like the 30s, I'm like, nah, bro. I'm keeping my butt inside.
Okay.
That ain't happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could take heat if we didn't have humid heat here.
Yeah. We all might as well just like move to like the Midwest or something, or like in like Texas, so we can all just have like that dry heat, or just at least go like to the coast so we can have the breeze.
See, I like that because in Puerto Rico it's always hot.
Yeah.
But what I love about it is that you get that nice ocean breeze come through. Oh, and it is wonderful.
That's right.
You know, and the funny part is that a lot of people might not know is that for the non-Hispanics, we don't have AC over there. AC is not a thing unless you have like a brandly new built house or you buy an AC. A lot of the houses don't have AC and they're concrete. So mind you, we rely solely on fans. You know, and
that's our era.
I haven't been in a while.
That's our era, right?
No. The AC was kind of like, what's the word? Non-existent. We grew up, sweating like crazy, even in our sleep. We relied on the fans, and it was nice. I was fine with it. It was. I say the heat here is much worse than the heat there.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, the heat here is so much more worse. Because I went to Puerto Rico for like a few weeks and I was enjoying it. The heat was great. It felt awesome.
Yeah.
I came back to North Carolina. I was like, I hate this place.
Yeah.
Like the heat was disgusting.
I think it's just this whole like southeast area is just like really bad. It just kind of like sits.
We're in a bowl.
Yeah.
And we don't have coastal breezes like what you're saying, David.
We don't.
It's just like.
It's like we just have like the worst of both worlds.
It's very true. It's just kind of like.
And then like my dad says like my dad used to live in like Maryland, like up north, and he says it's much worse than over here because like he said he'll like go out there and like he would mow the lawn and like the lawn wasn't that big, but like as soon as he finished like a small like 30 minutes it'll be like drenched in sweat, and I'm like, bro, really? And he said it's because like I guess like the Bay Area, like it just traps all the heat in there, and it can't actually like ventilate out because of that like that coastal thing.
That's crazy.
So I think they have it worse, and plus it's like just a giant concrete city too. So I learned to not complain as much.
Yeah.
But like it's still kind of bad.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. Before we ran into those I guess you could say technical difficulties here with the sound. Our era, yes, it is the fans, and that is absolutely it. Maybe open a window and try to get that kind of breeze in as well. Thankfully, now they're starting to figure out what mini splits are, or the window units, what those are, or just a unit per room is a little bit more common, out there now, but. Yeah, it's definitely rough. I love the hot weather. Personally, I don't like the cold. I'm sorry. I just don't. I don't like snow. In fact, I like snow on the TV, maybe. I like to see it from the inside.
Snow cones?
I mean, come on now.
We don't really have snow here in the south. That's the thing. We have ice.
Like every 4 or 5 years. 6, 7 years now.
Very true.
Right?
Yeah, no.
It is ice now. That's right.
Yeah. It's just all that humidity. It just gets frozen, and then it just sticks as ice. I think I like the more temperate, like if it's cooler but it's not cold, like getting into fall, I guess, when I can just like more comfortably go outside with like some shorts, and it's it's not hot, but it's not cold.
See,
It's
you
like
know,
70, like 60, 70-ish.
I agree. I personally love the snow. The snow is something that I enjoy. Not as much as, you know, most people would. I enjoy like here and there occasionally.
Yeah.
But I remember, I'm sure you probably still, you were there around the time that it snowed like really bad. That one year in North Carolina, like it came down like hard. Like, that was
probably
years ago.
Yeah, I was probably like in 3rd grade or something.
I remember like it came down hard. We had like 5-6 inches of snow.
That's crazy.
School was canceled. Nobody was driving, and that was the best time of my life, man. I enjoyed it.
I don't believe in it, man. Anything that numbs my fingers, no sir.
And the thing is, in the South, they don't know how to deal with snow. So like one little drop of snow, like everybody just cancels everything. You know, it's snowing.
Oh my god!
And it'll be like sleet.
The people up north give us a hard time about that, but they don't know how to handle strong heat.
No, they don't.
True.
You know,
That's
and it's
true.
funny because I lived up north for like 6 months, give or take, and it literally they say, oh, in my, you know, I had just gotten there and they said, oh, it's gonna snow. They're expecting like 7 inches of snow. I'm like, oh, they're gonna cancel school.
Yeah.
No, you know, we got up same morning.
Wow.
You know, it was already starting to snow. We got to school. It was snowing. It wasn't until they said they were gonna get about a foot of snow that they was like, okay, we can cancel it now, and they sent everybody home early.
That's right.
But it was just kind of like, bro, that's crazy.
I know.
Like that, you know, that's crazy that like they're so used to that it's like it doesn't even faze them. Like, yeah, bro, I'll you know, I'll go out and it's 2 feet of snow. That's cool, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm like, nah, dude, that ain't it, chief. I'm not driving this snow. That ain't happening.
No.
Not for me.
No, thank you.
But no, you know, it's funny. So it's, you know, I know we talked about last week about it was God's promises aren't always in our timing.
Right.
And you know, after the show, you know, we had talked about how we felt like there was more there to say that, you know, unfortunately we had to end a little bit earlier, that we didn't get to finish. So we decided, you know, like we had said, we were going to go ahead and finish it today. And it's so important to know and understand, you know, to kind of give a recap to what we talked about last week. You know, we were talking about how, you know, how God gave Abraham the promise and Sarah, and how Abraham had to wait more than like almost close to almost 100 years, something like that, to receive Isaac. You know, and we also talked about the fact of what happened when Abraham and Sarah went off the rails and decided to have Ishmael, and what happened there. And we were having a very deep discussion about our spiritual condition as far as when it comes to, you know, our promises that God has given us, and I think that you know, that's something important that we can, you know, we can go off from there. Something that really hit me that we had talked about, you know, what Ruben has said, that, you know, we have to be spiritually strong in many ways, and we can't consume spiritual junk food and expect to, you know, be, you know, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually ready to receive a promise that God has given us. Yeah. And be patient and waiting on that time. And I think that, you know, something that came to mind when I was thinking about that, when I was contemplating on it the past couple of days, was that when we don't take the process, it's not so much about the wow, that's crazy. The promise that God gives us isn't necessarily the part that God wants us to learn more about, but the process that we go through to get to that point. You know, when we go through the process that God wants to put us through before we receive the promise, it's true. You know, it's something that it's a learning process for us to understand more about what God wants to do with us and what He wants to do through us. You know, and it's so important to really in that time, in that process, to dive deeper with God, because at the end of the day, you will not. Oftentimes, when you're not connected with God, how are you going to recognize the promise He's given you when you don't have a good established relationship or connection with Christ in your spiritual life and your prayer life and your everyday life? You know, I think that's something that's really, really important. If we don't take care of that, we leave room for us to make mistakes the way that, you know, unfortunately, a lot of big biblical characters in the Bible made, waiting on God. And I think that that's something I find that's very important to understand. But go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, when you had mentioned that that those trials or the processes that it takes for us to get to the promises that God has us is the thing that really brings us, and that made me think of James chapter 1 verse 2, where it says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds." Going on to verse 3, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. And perfect in this sense means like mature and complete, lacking nothing. But I think that's very an interesting view and everything, because like it's the process that takes you there, and it's like that's the kind of thing that really matures you as a person. Not so much just getting the gift, but actually attaining the gift, or being ready to be being mature to be able to receive the gift.
I like that.
Oh yeah, I like too.
I think, it's something important, with the sense of, personally, it's like when, and I agree, when we and God has given it to us, we have to be very spiritually mature and responsible to be able to handle that. We can't say, "Oh God, where's my ministry that you promised me 10 years ago?" Yeah. But in those 10 years, you've done absolutely nothing with God.
You're still like at the childlike level.
Exactly.
You're just even getting to the basics.
Exactly. So it's like, and God's like, "How am I going to give this to you if you're not ready for it?"
Even God says, like, how can I expect to give somebody like these spiritual gifts if they can't even handle like money correctly? Stuff
Exactly.
Like that. How can you handle like the things from this world if you expect to handle like these more grave spiritual things? Like
exactly.
Grave, but like
and I think it's interesting because that kind of brings me to the parable of the talents. Even though the talents is very widely used as far as like gifts and stuff that God's given us to use on this planet, on this earth while we're still here, I think there's another lesson in that, as in the sense of that the process that they went through, each servant went through, and what they did with what they had. God gives us a promise, so we're supposed to cultivate what we already have, the seed that He's already planted in us, in order for it to sprout and grow into something that He wants to use. Now, what's going to happen when He comes back and says, "What did you do with what I told you?"
Yeah.
Well, no, I was waiting on you.
Yeah.
Who told you to wait on me? Who told you to, and it sounds, to those of you listening, don't think I'm trying to tell you how to go ahead and, if God gives you a promise to be an evangelist, to go and evangelize. No, that's not what I'm saying. But what you do in your personal life with God, privately, that's what I'm talking about. When you cultivate that, when you nourish that, when you nourish that relationship first, in order for you to have that, receive that promise and that gift that God has given you, I think that it's very important to be able to, to have that, to do that, because at the end of the day, how can I tell you, "Hey, Damien, I need you, to go teach a class at Augusta University," but you don't have no freaking clue how to do that?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with going to school. Oftentimes in careers that we want, we have to go to school for an extensive amount of years, because they're not going to put you into that field if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And even if you say, "Oh, I'm going to school," and you're like, how I was, that you'll just kind of, write it off, and you'll get by, so to speak. You're still not really necessarily learning anything, are you?
No.
Because you're just trying to get school over with, blah blah blah. By the time you had your degree, you have everything, and it seems like you have it all together. But when someone asks you something about the field and how you should handle it, you're like,
Exactly. One teacher said this at one point. It was like I think it was elementary school or middle school, and this person was cheating on an exam. She was like, "It's fine. They don't even learn anything anyways. If you cheat, you really don't learn anything. You just get by." And I'm like, whoa, that kind of stuck with me. Even though everybody kind of wrote it off like, "Oh, I want to cheat anyways." But I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. Because if I just like kind of just shortcut everything, I'm still not going to learn anything. You get the credentials, but you don't have the actual experience to be able to back those credentials up. And I think that I think God really gives us. He doesn't, I guess, expect us to do everything immediately. Like, we have to be completely spiritually ready right now to be able to like just receive, like, I guess, a small part of our gift. I'm pretty sure, or I think I've seen it to where, and I'm experiencing it myself, to where it's like increments. Like, you get this part, okay, you've been able to grow this much, so I give you this, and then you grow a little bit more, and I give you this and give you this, and by the time you're like, I guess, more spiritually mature than you were, like, say 6 years ago, then now you've been able to receive, I guess, a greater, more gift than before.
Right. So, for instance, this kind of also leads a little bit into our church's AMO class tonight. One of the homeworks that we had was to send two Bible verses that mention or talk about inheritance. And the one that I came to was Luke chapter 16, verse 11, and pretty much just to kind of give an overview of what's happening within this chapter. It's the parable of the shrewd manager. Where Jesus was telling his disciples, that there was a rich man, and he had a manager, and he was accused of wasting his possessions, right? And so what ended up happening was that the owner, right, ended up calling in the manager, asking him, hey, listen, what's this that I hear about you? Wasting away and not taking care of my possessions, so on and so forth. And so he fired him, right? Then what he ended up doing is he tried to figure out how he could still maintain afloat. He ended up going and created a scheme, sat down with the people who owed his master, and instead of charging him the entire amount, he charged him, let's say, like half of the amount. You see what I'm saying? And so my point with this is that Luke chapter 16 verse 10 and on says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you your property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So again, that kind of ran into the whole thing about the Amo class. But if you're looking at it in different sense, in different areas, sometimes the Lord gives us possession of certain things, right? Whether it's I don't want to say title, but a position, right? Responsibility is the better word. Sometimes he gives us responsibility, right? For instance, sometimes our parents are not going to give us a Mercedes-Benz right off the bat to drive if you just got your license.
Right.
I'm sorry. That being said, brother, you gotta learn how to drive in that Hoopty Honda, right? In that beat up Honda before you can get this Mercedes Benz. Nothing against Hondas. Lasts a lifetime. But you guys get what I'm saying. You see what I'm saying? And so that's sometimes the way the Lord works, right? He's our spirit, he's our Father, right? And he says, you know what? How are you going to take care of this that I'm giving you now? I'm not going to give you the best all at once, because you might not take care of it the way you actually need to. You need to learn. You need to gain wisdom. You need to learn how to be able to cultivate what you currently have to grow. And then it's the same thing with the job. You're not going to be given a manager role if you don't know how to handle the responsibilities of a manager. If you don't know how to work with people, how are you going to be given responsibility over people? It can't work like that.
It's really interesting. Oh, I'm sorry. No, okay. So at my job, there's to be able to make like a walk cook, it takes a lot of like skill and knowing the plates and all these things that go into it. So you have to like start on different station. You have to be working with meats first. You know, you do this like learn how much meat goes in one thing. And then that's very simple. You can just like put one meat down and that's it. And then you go to the vegetable station, you learn all the different kinds of vegetables, and it's much harder and much more stuff to keep track of. And then once you get those two stations down, then you know what goes on a plate. So as soon as you receive a plate in the walk cook, then you know exactly what to do with it. You know the sauces, and you know how to actually like liquefy and all that stuff, and you do it. And it's taken me like 2 months to get to this point now. And I am actually glad for it, because I know where everything goes, how everything works, and I know how the whole line works, and I can do I can do everything.
Yeah.
But some people kind of skip both positions, and then they go straight on walk cook, because that's like the prize. That's like the crown jewel of the whole kitchen. You can cook walk.
So everybody trying to just get some wok cook, and now they have no idea what this plate is. They don't know how to make. They don't know how to make the plate. They don't know what it looks like. And I'm like, very interesting. I went through this whole 2 months, and they kind of jump ship, and now they're like, oh, what's going on? Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. You got to go back on the first station. You got to spend 2 months or doing whatever. And it's just like very interesting how I feel like God does this all the time. Like he just makes you go through these things. It's kind of like with like Karate Kid, where he just makes you wash the car, just do it now, and then you kind of get that ingrained. And then once you get more responsibility, like actually working with fighting people, then it's right there. Like, that's all you got to do.
Muscle memory.
It's muscle memory.
And I think that's something that's important to remember about Scripture too, because I'm glad that we're talking about the process, because when I think about different figures within the Bible, we see their process many times. We see like Moses, we see his process. David, we see his process. But there are certain characters within the Bible that we do need to emphasize, and figures that we do need to think about that we didn't see their process. One that the Lord was bringing to mind was one that we kind of almost got around to the Sunday when Pastor was speaking on Sunday, was with Samuel's mother, Hannah. I mean, she asked and begged the Lord to have a son for years and years and years. And then finally the Lord was like, I'm going to give you a son. And so when it's time for her to have a son, she dedicates him to the Lord and says he's going to work in the temple all the days of his life. That was the promise that she made. But I'm sure that over the course of the 9 months that she had Samuel in her womb, there was a process that the Lord took her through to be able to release him from her own hands, to trust him with the Lord in the temple.
I like that.
And the thing is, you see that exemplified in chapter 2 of 1 Samuel, where she basically gives this prayer, basically talking about that release, from what I'm gathering. And I think it's interesting that we see that the Lord working in someone like Hannah, even though we didn't see her process, we know that there was a process for her in that 9-month period. But I mean, there's more to her prayer than just that. But anyway, that's what I wanted to mention as well. So,
I like, part of what what Ruben said, it really caught me. It brought me to really the story of the prodigal son. I like that because the prodigal son, instead of, doing what he should have been doing and working and slaving for his inheritance, not slaving, but working for his inheritance and being faithful to his father. When I say slaving, I mean like working at it, putting the dedication, the passion. I'm sorry, guys. No slaves here. But,
it was just funny the way you said it.
Yeah, I try to correct myself, like, oh crap, too late. But no, like, instead of working towards, he said, I want my inheritance. And the father just, all right, if you want your inheritance, all right, cool. He didn't know how to actually manage his inheritance properly. And not only that, but he didn't know how to be responsible for it. And what happens? He found himself literally eating food from the pigs because he ended up wasting everything he had. So then he found himself humbly coming to his father and saying, just take me back as a servant at least. At the latest, I'll take that. But the beauty about the father was that he took him still back as his son. Which I love that. That's something so beautiful about God, is even when in those moments that he gives us a promise and we kind of falter, yes, we're going to have to deal with the consequences of our actions, but he's still such a good father that he's still there and ready to receive us back and say, okay, you've done it your way, it didn't work, now try my way. And it's so amazing. There's so much to tell there. I like what you said about Samuel and Hannah as well, because that goes in hand with Abraham as well. When Abraham had Isaac, and God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. The Bible doesn't necessarily say if Abraham struggled with it or whether he did or didn't. No one knows. But when I read it in my mind, I'm like, okay, cool, let's go for it. And it's amazing because it's like that's his only child. Only child, give or take. But we don't know what was going on through Abraham's mind at that moment. But to see what Abraham did was really the I find it the most sacrificial thing that any human has done besides what Jesus did on the cross, because he was willing to give his only son up to God. The one promise that God has given him, and it goes so perfectly because what happens when God gives us a promise and we begin to prize the promise more than God.
That's right.
And we begin to take that in. It's like, oh, it's mine. And that's not God. That's not what God created it to be in the first place. God gave us a promise for us to give it back to Him. Now it's for us to keep it hold and not let go. Because at the end of the day, you're gonna lose that. You're not gonna be able to properly manage what God has given you without God. There's no way. That's like I don't know, Ruben telling one of his employees to go open the store up at the bank, but and then the employee tries to go do it, but Ruben's not there. He has no idea what he's doing, and it's just, and it's funny because, how can you do that? How can you manage anything without first the boss being there, and secondly being in constant communication with the boss to know what the vision of what the boss wants to do with that store, with that business, whatever the case may be. So the same thing with God. You can't if God wants to give you a ministry, why in the world would you try to run a ministry without God?
Yeah, it's true, and I think that's the problem. Before I say what I'm going to say, I did want to make a correction. I said 1 Samuel 2. I should have said 1 Samuel 1 verse 28 if you're following along. So I apologize for misstating that. The prayer was separate from what you decreed. But to follow up with what you're saying, I think it's important because I think if we rush headlong into something that we think we're going to be good at versus what the Lord wants us to follow through with, I think we have to be careful in what we're doing. Just because so often, even if it might be a good thing, just in general description, we can't just go ahead and jump into it because that may not be the thing that the Lord's built us for.
Exactly.
Because I know that I'm not made to play drums right now, but Damien, when he leads worship, he is made to play drums, and he can get up onto the stage and he can help lead worship, and he can play the drums way better than I could. I'd just be up there banging sticks and I wouldn't know what would be going on, but you would know exactly what you're doing. So I think that's something that's important. So thank you for pointing that out.
Both of the examples that you guys were talking about made me think of Jesus, how God gives his only son, and I was thinking, like, how does this connect what we're talking about? But then I remember, like, because I've been starting to watch The Chosen. Yeah. And the whole first part is where Jesus is like, it's not time yet. It's not time yet. It's not time yet. He's like waiting, and he's waited 30 years at this point right now.
Exactly.
And he doesn't force it. He knows exactly when he should, and he doesn't like get impatient with the Father. And he's like, all right, I'm just gonna do my part, just do this stuff in the middle. He spends like the first however many years like just studying and just being in the Word, just like learning everything. And then even then, when it's like, I guess nearing time, he's still like not yet, because how many times do we know it's coming and we're like, I'm just gonna go now. I'm just gonna go now, and then we end up losing everything because we still got too impatient. It wasn't time yet.
Exactly. And it's so funny that you mentioned Jesus, because he's God in the form of man. He could have done that from the moment he was a child. But he knew that there was a purpose and a plan and a process through everything that he, from the moment he was a child to the moment that he was a grown man. And he knew that it had to be in the perfect timing. That's why he was 33, he was in his 30s, 33 years old when he started his ministry. And that was, and the crazy part is that it only lasted 3 years. Yeah. That's the crazy part about that. You would think that it lasted 10, 15 years. No, only 3 years. It's literally, and I think it's so funny that the number 3 is so important in all this. Yeah. Because mind you, 33 years old when he started his ministry. It was 3 years during his ministry, and he was raised from the dead 3 days. He was in the tomb 3 days. So it's so funny that the number 3 has such a significant role in all of this. It to me, it's it's very important, at the end of the day, to understand and know the process. Jesus was in constant communication with God, so he understood that his process, he had to wait. He had to wait. Yeah, the Bible doesn't talk about what it does not talk about Jesus' life before his ministry, not at all. But even that's not really important. That's not what the message is about. But the point is that at least the way I would see it, I would see it that he knew what God was doing. He trusted God, and he was raised in the law. He knew and understand the law very, very well, and he knew everything that was going on. Because I know there's a little snippet in the Gospels that talk about how Jesus as a child and how he was asking the Pharisees questions, and how the Pharisees were dumbfounded by the fact that this child is asking these questions. How can this child have so many questions? And it's so interesting. Even as a child, he knew exactly what was going on, but he still needed to wait no matter what. So I think that even when we have, like you said, even when we have our promises, we have to, even when God has finally given us our promises, we have to make sure that we're taking every step aligned with the will of God, and we know exactly at the time and the place of where we can use the promises that he's given us. So I think that's, I love that you said that, and that's, that's really important to really take heed of as well.
process was the fact that he had to go through that. And here's the reason why. You know, one of the most important things for us is to be disciples. That's what we're called to do. And that's what we've been talking about in our youth chapel. You know, leading like Jesus. Right? And so the thing about it is, yes, he could have done it from the jump, but that's why the process was so important. That's why the process was so important. Because of the fact that his life, his entire ministry ended up being a testimony for others. And that's exactly how it is for us. We need to take in the process, because when we take in the process, we also get closer to God, but people will also get closer to God through your testimony and your process. That's why Job, right? That's why Job ended up saying, my ears have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Because he went through a process that he lost absolutely everything. Family, children, wives, his riches, everything. Right? And because he went through that process, it's where he grew closer. And look up today, today up to this point, we use him in so many examples of faith and staying loyal to the Lord. Wow. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I agree. You know, I think that, you know, Job is such an excellent example of what happens when God decides to take your blessing away. See what happens. You know, and it wasn't that God did it. He let the enemy do it, which is so interesting because, you know, the enemy, what I like about the story of Job is that the enemy had to ask God for permission before he could do anything. Because he literally said, lift your coverage from him and see what happens. And it's so crazy that we often give the enemy so much power that he doesn't have. You know, and especially when it comes to stuff like this, you know, and I love that because he was faithful even when everything he had was taken away from him. He was faithful to God till the end. And what happened? God gave him 10 times over what he had. You know, I can't imagine losing a child, let alone losing all of your children, on top of losing everything that you have all in the same day. You know, I can't imagine that. That's like bad news after bad news after bad news after bad news. Yeah. And even all that, Job didn't curse God for nothing.
That's right.
He didn't say, "Oh, why did you do this to me? Why are you doing this to me? Blah 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 blah. This and that." No, he said, you know, he asked God for forgiveness, and he literally gave his all to God.
That's right.
And I love that. I absolutely love that because, you know, it you know, to me, it also another story that to me it brings me to Noah. Yeah. When God gave Noah the word about the flood and the ark, I was so interested to find out how long Noah was preaching. And even though the Bible doesn't specifically say, but with scholars estimating, they said that he was preaching close to about 100 years.
Yep.
Can you imagine preaching over 100 years a message that no one would believe in, that you weren't seeing come to fruition until then? Can you imagine that? The Bible also says that it took him over 120 years to build the ark.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that?
That'd be crazy.
And not only that, but at the age he was 500 years old. At 24, I can sometimes I suck at walking up the stairs. Can you imagine 500 years old? You're building an ark that giant.
Yeah. I know.
On top of having to raise a bunch of kids props to him. Yeah. Props to him. But
they did something different back then.
And I think that's something interesting too, because he's speaking to multiple generations that are being born. And I think when we see that as believers today, I think that kind of brings me to an idea that the Lord was really putting on my heart about this, because I was thinking about process for us and the timing. I love what y'all have been talking about with timing, because what I think the problem is for us is the fact that I think so many of us think that the process is only about us. And I think the issue is we need to get off of this self-centered mindset about being about us with the process, because in reality, whatever the Lord's bringing us through and whatever the Lord's promised us is something that He's going to use to deposit into somebody else. And so we have to quit thinking that the process is all about us, because how many of us have benefited from the testimony of Job's life, or the testimony of Hannah's life, or David's, or Noah's, or Abraham's, or any of the disciples? We've benefited off of what the Lord's used in their lives, and the struggles and the challenges and the tests and the process that He's built them through. So why do we think we're any different when we think our process can't be used as a testimony to speak to somebody else?
I agree.
So yeah,
I agree. You know, it's so interesting. You know, this whole thing is so interesting to really look at, because, you know, at the end of all of that, you know, with me, with the story of Noah, was that, you know, Noah became the father of an entire new generation as well. And it's so interesting. It's like, wow, like, he was blessed with that much.
Yeah.
He was blessed with that much, and he got to live for so long. He was able to see so many generations after him come to fruition, and it all started with him being faithful to God. Even though to us 100 years, like, bro, that's 100 years. Yeah. That's 100 years. That's a lifetime.
Being faithful to God that long,
exactly,
that much more blessing.
But see, that's where it comes in when we say that God's timing isn't ours. 100 years to him was, to us, it's like extremely long. To God's like, that's it, gone. You know, and it's so important. It's so amazing to understand that, you know, to really stay in connection of that, because oftentimes when we don't do that, like I said, we give the enemy leeway to work, to come into our lives, and to get us to mistreat what we've been given. And, you know, at the end of the day, you can potentially lose everything if you're not careful. You can potentially lose absolutely everything. You can use the blessing on top of the fact of the purpose. You know, and for me, from my personal testimony, I'm always very careful about how I treat what God has given me, because I'm a firm believer that God has given it to you, He can also take it away if you mistreat it. You know, a blessing can turn into a curse real fast.
That's right.
If you don't know how to take care of it right. And that's something that we need to understand, we need to really uphold and cherish, because at the end of the day, you're going to get yourself hurt, and you're going to find yourself in an even worse state than you were originally if you were to just, you know, if you were to just follow God properly in the way that you should have in the process.
And I think that's something.
No, go ahead.
And I think that fits with King Saul versus David. That perfectly fits it, because David would have been what we would think. It's like, okay, he was an ideal king for Israel. I mean, just like in terms of being an earthly king, he fits the description of what we would think. Okay, he did a good job for the most part. But when we think about Saul, we see this guy who comes into this position because these people are begging and begging and begging for a king, and so the Lord's like, fine, you want a king over me to rule you? Here's the parameters. And I think it's interesting because, like, he did the exact same thing. If he just followed what the Lord commanded him to do as a king, he would have probably lived a pretty successful life and a pretty good life. But he didn't. He said, I'm going to do what I think is best in this moment, and then go off on his own path. And we saw it ended up leading to his own destruction and his kids' destruction, and someone succeeding him, and him just basically being seen as nothing but a negative force for Israel. So
he became a hindrance to the people of Israel, and to the vision that God had for the entire generation of Israel. Because it's so interesting, you know, we look at, you know, David. In that essence, David was anointed even before he even became king in the first place, and was told that he was going to be king. But David still faithfully served Saul, and he feared and loved Saul no matter what. Even when he was well within his rights to end Saul's life for what Saul was doing, he still had so much fear for God that he said, how could I hurt an anointed one of God? Even when everyone around him was telling him to do otherwise. So it's very important. That story is important, because we're going to get people that come into our lives, even people in the church that say, bro, why don't you start your ministry already? What's happening? Why don't you do this? You know, God told you that. That's why I say the enemy can use, you know, people outside of the world, and he can use the people inside the church just as much as he can use people outside of in the world.
There's this sorry.
No, go ahead.
There's this like funny meme song. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it, but it's like this lady, she just like gets up. One thing I now realize this if God won't do it? It just won't
I know exactly what you're I love that one. Because it makes sense. It's like, if God won't do it, like, I'm not going to do it on my own. Right. Obviously, I'm going to fail. Right. So if God won't do it, then I don't have to worry about it.
it does. Right. But on a more serious note, that what you guys been talking about with like people end up letting the blessing become a curse. It reminds me of Romans 1:24 or that in 24 and 25. But it said, therefore God gave them up in the lust of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. So it makes me think like you're worshiping the creation, the creature, like things that you have already gotten over the Creator. And it's like we can make that into a blessing thing as well when we start worshiping the blessing, when we start putting the blessing above God, and then immediately that becomes our downfall because it can't sustain us, only God can. So it's like when you actually have the blessing, I think a good part in stewarding it well is not making it the bigger part of your life over God. Like God is still like holding. I was thinking about this earlier. I think it's from like Ecclesiastes, where it's better to just hold life with an open hand, because it can be taken away so quickly. But not being so concerned about that and being more concerned about God, it's like, oh, it doesn't even matter if it's taken away because I still have this thing. He'll give me something better if he takes it away. Not clutching your hands and trying to hold life, because then at that point you lose it. Jesus even said that later on. I'm sorry. Jesus said that later on. He even said that later on, where he's like, you lose your life when you try to save yourself. When you try to save your life, you end up losing it. But if you lose your life for my sake, then you gain everything in the world. So it's kind of like this topsy-turvy way of the kingdom, where it's like I don't even bother like the materialistic things, because I have something much more greater in the kingdom. And that's something I've been coming to a sort of realization with in like just recent events that have happened. It's like I don't even have to worry about this. I don't have to worry about like concerning myself with getting all these things and trying to attain all these blessings and all that stuff. I mean, it's something so much better in the kingdom. I don't have to worry about it.
I agree. You know, I think it's very important also when we look at the promise that God has given us as far as eternity. It's so important, because oftentimes we'll be so focused on getting to heaven that we lose sight of God. And I heard this saying once that this preacher was like, everybody wants to go to heaven, but not everybody wants God to be there when they get there. And that's so important, because then you start to see that blessing of heaven as your ultimate thing that you can achieve in life, when that's not it. It should be with God.
That's right.
And it's so amazing that you know I'm not trying to make myself seem bigger than what I am, but for me, the way I see it is, every time I ever think about heaven and stuff like that, I tell God, even if I'm at your feet worshiping you for all eternity, I'm okay with that.
Agreed.
I would have loved to do that. Because I've heard I've talked to many Christians, and a lot of them I've heard they talk about what they're going to receive when they get to heaven.
Right.
Oh, I want this when I get to heaven. Imagine if they had this. Yeah, in a way, it sounds kind of like silly and like kiddish, to talk about. It seems harmful, but at the same time, when that becomes a sole topic of what you talk about, the sole thing, the very thing that you see, that's like, oh, I want. You're just looking at what God's going to give you, rather than looking at the fact like, wow, I get to see God in person one day. I get to be there with Him. That's like, I can't even fathom that. I can't fathom that. And it's so amazing. It's so amazing that, I've listened to a lot of testimonies. I know you guys, we have to be very careful about what we listen to. A lot of testimonies on, near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences that people have had with Christ. And every single one of them, I found a common connection, that God gives them an option whether they want to stay in heaven or if they want to go back. And oftentimes, every single one of them said that they wanted to stay, but God would tell them, okay, you want to stay, and that's fine. But here's what's going to be, these are the people that are going to miss out on what I can do with you if you do stay. And that's so amazing, because and they've all said that they've all decided they needed to go back because they knew that God still needed them, wanted to use them on this earth. And that's so crazy to think, like, you got an opportunity to receive everything that you've literally have looked forward to your entire life, to have an eternity with God, and you turn it down at that moment because you know that God wants to use you in something completely different, and that it wasn't about you, but it was about those that needed God.
Right.
And that's so amazing.
Yeah.
And that is so important, because at the end of the day, when we're here and we're doing everything that we're doing, we need to understand that it's not about us. It's for the message of Christ, and it's for those that need it. That need to understand who God is and what He has done for us. Right. So when we turn it into the fact like, oh, like, look at me, I'm doing all this.
Yeah, it becomes problematic because, like you said, you're seeking the benefits without actually seeking the one who's the purpose why we're there. I mean, the whole reason why He came and died is so we could have right standing with Him, so we could be in a relationship with Him. Because I agree, that's something that's a pet peeve of mine too. I mean, I love the song I Can Only Imagine. I can only listen to it
it's
so
such
much.
a beautiful song.
It's a beautiful song.
The story behind it is even better.
The whole point, though, when you hear the song, it's not about the stuff. It's about being there with Him. It's not about, and I'm going to do this when I get there, and I'm going to go talk to this person, I'm going to talk to that person. I'm like, I don't care. I'm like, obviously, I'll be excited to see certain family members that are there right now, but at the same time, I'll kind of be like, if they're going to be the ones that greet me, I'd want to kind of push them out of the way and be like, where's Jesus? I'm like, you're great. I've got an eternity to talk to you. Bye.
We'll be back later. We got the time. Yeah, it's like we want to be with Jesus. That's the thing. We should want to be with Jesus.
You know, were you gonna say something? I have a little. I was like, this could be a whole separate topic, but like seeing, like, only focusing on yourself rather than God. That's a whole different thing. Yeah, I see that a lot where people are just like, oh, I'm so bad. Look at me, where is me, or all this stuff, and it's so like. You're so focused on yourself, but I don't really have as much like preparedness space. So I'm not one, so I won't go into it. But I definitely think that's like a thing where we start focusing on not God, and things just kind of go south really quickly. Yeah. I know we've reached the time. My takeaway to all of this, that I have to say to everybody, my last thing really is that we talked about the fact that we were just talking about the fact of what happens when we cherish the blessing and what God does through us and with us more than God. But Jesus gives a warning to that too in the Gospels, when He said that many came to Him and said, we prophesied in your name, we liberated the demons in your name. The key word there is saying we. Yep. They weren't giving Him the credit for what He did. So that shows that they never knew Christ in the beginning, because they were relying on what they were doing rather than what God was doing. And that's why He said, depart from me, all you evildoers, I never knew you. Because they never truly knew Christ. Because if they knew Christ, they would have said, God, what about everything that you did through me? What about all those people you healed through me? It's not about we. I hear a lot of people say that. Oh, God, I heal for the sick. I. No, you don't have the power. No, get off that pedestal. You don't have that. God is the one that has it, not you.
You are dust.
No, and that's essentially the truth. We gotta humble ourselves, and that's why He gives us that warning. He's saying, be careful, because yes, I will do many things through you, but remember, do not cherish what I'm doing through you, because that's not what matters. That's what I do through you is for the person that's receiving it, not for you. That's not for you. And it's so amazing that He gives us that warning even before any of this ever happened. So it's so important to understand that. It's so important that you guys really nourish and really take that in, because at the end of the day, it's not about you, it's about Christ and what God wants to do through you. So regardless of what you have and what God is giving you, don't think that you're doing it by your own strength, or that it's you doing it and it's God that's doing it for you. And I say that because I preach that to myself every single day. So you guys need to understand that and really have that in the back of your mind as well, because oftentimes we get to this self-idolization of who we are and what we've done, that we begin to put ourselves on the pedestal and we begin to become our own idols. So we need to be very mindful and careful of that,
but also not like discrediting yourself and everything you do.
Exactly.
Like, okay, yeah, you did this great, but what about the God who allowed you to do that?
Exactly.
But it's like He has also made you more than a conqueror.
Exactly.
I agree 100%.
I think it's, this will be my summing up point, it's being satisfied that you're a son and daughter in the King and letting that be the ultimate thing that you this is it. It's not that people see me as a famous radio person now, or somebody that's a famous preacher, or a famous evangelist, or whoever's being used by God to see a bunch of healings happen, or prophetic words, whatever. It's the fact that you are relishing in the fact of being a child of the King and going through the process of Him growing you over the course of this life. Not relishing in the fact of the things that are God's using you for, but it's the being with Him.
I agree. Well, guys, we have reached that time. We thank you guys so much for being so patient with us. We're so sorry. We're having so many technical difficulties with the sound. We're not sure what happened, but we promise that we will make sure that we get that squared away so that won't happen again. Thank you guys so much for joining in. I know I saw Karina was there and she joined in. I'm not sure. I didn't see who else joined in, but, for everybody that joined in live. Thank you guys so much. We're here not for us, but for you guys, and for those that you guys will share this link and this program to as well. So please, guys, don't forget to join us on our normal service at 7:30 on Wednesdays. It's a powerful youth chapel we have, and God speaks in such powerful ways through all the teachers and everything else. This Saturday, guys, for any of you that's listening that want information on college, please feel free to come out. Our church, it's going to be at the church, I'm assuming, right? Yes. It's going to be at our church at 10:30. Please feel free to come out. We're going to have guest speakers that's going to give us all the information that we need on college, and all the information that we need on how to, what to do with college, what to expect when you get to college and stuff like that, and they're going to be able to answer questions on all of our stuff. So please, on any questions you may have about college, so please feel free to come join us. It is totally free. We're not asking anybody to pay anything. Feel free to join in and be with us. I'm sorry, guys. We said 10:30. It's at 10 a.m. My apologies, guys. It's from 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. I should probably look at the poster. It's from 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Feel free to come out. It's only a couple hours, but I know you guys can receive an immense knowledge and understanding of how college works and everything. So please feel free. We thank you guys so much. And I'm sorry?
And also, this upcoming Wednesday is worship as well.
Ooh, worship nights. Worship nights are powerful, guys. Don't miss out. Worship nights is when God works very powerfully. So please, don't miss out. God's spoken very powerfully in worship nights too. So please, join. Even if you can only come once, we would more than love to have you guys once. Please come, be a part of it. We love you guys. We thank you guys so much for joining in to 97.3 WMFJ Oasis de Bendice. We will see you guys next week. Thank you guys. God bless.
God bless you.